cooperative effort that we had. Do want to have a couple of thank yous that have made today very possible for us. Marley Montgomery there in the back with the Smoky Bear-Wise Task Force. They've been a big help helping organize this. We also have from TWRA Dan Gibbs and Janelle Musser. They've been a very big help to help get this thing organized today. We also have from Appalachian Bear Rescue, Katrina and Greg. Thank you all for everything you all did to be here. We've got other folks from the Gatlinburg Police Department, TWRA here. And so we also have Ryan Williamson, who will be giving this presentation here at 9 or 10 o'clock. And he'll also be doing it again at 1:30. Ryan, thank you and National Park for coming today. We really appreciate that. So without any further ado, I will let Ryan do his presentation. And if you want to, after the presentation, we'll have the stations here if you've not been through to be able to talk to folks. So thank you again for being here. And Ryan, you can take it over.
Morning.
Morning.
Everybody doing okay today?
Mm-hmm.
Great. My name is Ryan Williamson. I'm a wildlife biologist for the National Park Service. And if I wasn't here, I'd be dealing with a bear that's currently waiting on me at my office. I'm a local to here. I was raised in Cott County, educated in Sevier County, and I live 200 yards from here, just right off Walnut Road. So a lot of the same bears that all these people deal with in this room walk through my yard every day. But what I came to today to talk about was about how we manage bears in the park, a little bit about bear behavior, and a little bit of our history and how we move with bear management as we evolve through the times. As bear management is evolving, everything is happening, populations are going up, visitors numbers are rising, so there's a lot of stuff happening in the bear world, and we're seeing that. If you ever need to get a hold of me, there's my number. Feel free to reach out, send me an email. I'll try to help you if I can. So everybody wants to know what bear management looks like in the park. This is what bear management looks like in the park. Overflowing trash cans, bears getting into cars, people hand feeding bears. This is every day in my park. We have a lot of people. You know, at one point we had 14 million visitors. You can't educate everyone. Everybody says education is the key, and it is a huge component. But regardless of how good you educate, you will never reach everyone. Backing up, the history of the park, we used to have a bear feeding regime, right? There were these roadside trash cans that people would come to this park and feed bears, throw garbage out for bears, and there was a lot of human-bear interactions in this time. We had a lot of people hurt by bears. When I look back at the numbers, it is astounding how many people had interactions with bears, from being scratched, bitten. So in the 50s and 60s was the height of this era, when there was a lot of visitation and there wasn't a lot of oversight. It was definitely no oversight for the most part. And as we evolved and our bear population grew, we realized that bear management is really trash management, right? So what we did in the late 70s, I believe, is we got these roadside trash cans. We used to have a roadside trash can at every single pull-off in the park. Why were we soliciting for trash? I have no idea. The park doesn't have fast food restaurants, so everybody, when you pulled off, there was a trash can there. You could empty your car out just like you do when you fill it up full of gas. So once we realized, man, we have all these trash cans that are not bear resistant. So in the late 70s, we put these they call this the mailbox slot. You pull the handle, put it down in there, and these were effective for a long period of time. The problem is what happens when that fills up, right? We have 14 million visitors in 2021. This is what happens. So regardless of how great your bear-proof system is, this is right outside park headquarters. This is right behind park headquarters. So this was, we took this picture and was like, this is why we have problems with these small containers. So what did we do? Well, first of all, we stopped soliciting for trash. We stopped asking people for their trash. When you have a trash can every other pull-off, right, you're asking people for trash. And for the most part, people come to this park to see beautiful vistas and nature. And most of those people are not going to litter. Regardless if there's a trash can there or not, they're not just going to throw their trash out the window. Now granted, we've all probably in this room done our fair of picking up trash, but for the most part, people don't litter. Especially, but if there's a trash can there, then that starts the process of overflowing and then litter getting everywhere. So we stopped soliciting for trash. Instead, we got rid of all those trash cans and increased our dumpster capacity, our volume. Back where that trash can was, we put dumpster there. But do you think this solved all of our problems? Absolutely not. Regardless of how much bear resistant stuff you have, the bears don't go away. Right? So what you have to do is you have to try to figure out how to take the people component out of that trash can. And what we were seeing is these lids that sit all the way back, right? People open it up because they're pretty challenging to watch. If you want a really good, enjoyable day, go up to Chimmy's picnic area and watch people try to figure out how to open up the dumpsters. Right? It's like watching people back down a boat ramp. It's enjoyable, right? And what we realized is we had two problems. Now we had two latches, and eventually the process of these things getting emptied would just beat them to death. And these latches would eventually fail, and people have a hard time with it. And if you can leave them open, they're not essentially bear resistant because there's a people component in there. You have to make it to where the lid won't all the way latch open. And when you do that, then you have problems like this. You got a big giant trash bag and a little tiny door, right? We've had people amputate their fingers. We've had things fall and bust people in the head. There's all different kinds of problems, right? Just because you have a bear resistant dumpster doesn't mean that everything's fixed. This is our next generation. If you go back up, see all these had 2 doors on them. That's twice as many problems. So the new generation only has 1 door, so now we only have 1 latch to fix instead of 2. The doors are a little bit bigger, and now these doors will not hold themselves up, right? So we put this beam up here to when it holds up. If you don't hold it up, it'll fall, right? Which keeps the door latch closed. We still only have a few of these in the park. This one is outside Sherman's Visitor Center. Last year, a bear rocked this enough to where he busted the concrete bolts out, and we had to back up and move it, drill. So we don't like these because it is bear resistant, but a big bear can still wreak havoc on it. So, focus up. Does it look like it focused to you?
Yep.
Aren't as great as it used to be. So when I looked at this presentation, I realized there was a little bit about bear behavior. So I was going to talk a little bit about what behaviors that we see in the park and everywhere else on the landscape, because bears only have a few behaviors to look out for. The first one is wild bear behavior, right? Those bears naturally have a fear of people, right? Their mother teaches them people are bad for them, stay away from them. Roads, cars, things like that, they will hurt us. For the most part, wild behavior is you're hiking down a trail, the bear hears you, sees you, or smells you and turns around and runs. That's the behavior that I prefer for bears. And that's the behavior that keeps bears safe. So that's why we prefer that behavior. But what happens over time, these bears get habituated. And habituated is basically bears can live in the presence of people. I relate it to most people like an actor. You know, if Tom Hanks goes out to a fast food restaurant, he has this giant paparazzi that follows him around. So he can live out his life while being watched by other people, right? That is habituation, right? So these bears get habituated to the presence of people. And I highlighted it. If you go to Cates Cove and you see those bears out there, I mean, you can drive around Cates Cove right now and see 20-some bears. And they can live out their lives in the presence of people and act normally and do what they need to do to survive, but they always have paparazzi standing right there watching them and recording their every move. All right, what is interesting is those bears are only there during daylight hours. So there's people offer female bears and cubs and things a certain amount of protection. Because guess what isn't there, right? You got the female bears with cubs. Coyotes aren't hanging around. They're going to kill their cubs. Big male bears aren't hanging around. So there's a little bit of protection associated with the presence of people. So if they can learn to live in the presence of people by being habituated, then does that make sense to everyone? So it allows a little bit of protection, and that's why we see a lot of habituation. The problem with habituated bears is it can change, those behaviors can change very quickly to a food conditioned bear. And a food conditioned bear is a bear that approaches people for food, right? And what happens in Cade's Cove. This is a great example. A bear is eating on a black gum tree, or an acorn tree, or a cherry tree. It's right on the side of the road, right? It's got 20 cars backed up. The bear's going down, up and down the tree. Well, people pull up, they take pictures, and they're like, oh, I bet it's hungry. 100%. Bears are always hungry. That is their job, is to eat, okay? So what happens is they throw a piece of food out to it, right? So the bear's like, oh, I just have to come down and eat this food. So I can just sit right here on the roadside and beg like a dog, right? Oh, well, why would I have to beg? I can walk over to their car and I can just take it out of their hand, right? That is food conditioned behavior. The bear is associating people with food, but not only people, he is also associating that car with food, right? So even if there's people in it or not, the bear thinks there's food in there, right? That's why we see an increase in bears tearing into vehicles, because I have a car seat in my car. If you raise up the car seat, what do you find? Gummy worms, popcorn, French fry. Those things the bears can smell outside of the car very easily. So that's that food conditioned behavior. And that happens very quickly. So those bears that are already habituated to the presence of people can jump over that line really fast to food conditioned behavior. And when I say food conditioned, it's not just people. It's a trash bag. They learn to associate things with food. Trash bags, a box, a car. All those things, they learn that association very quickly. I tell everybody that bears are one-time learners. They're a lot like people. You slam your fingers in the car door. How many times you do that in your life? Right? Some of us twice. Most of us once. Right? So once they get food from a person, or once they walk up to a Toyota Tacoma and grab the handle and pull with their mouth, they have learned to open car doors. And most all car doors are that easy latch system. And once they do that, they get it. They learn very quickly. All right, I was going to jump into how we manage bears in the park. And this is a brief overview, okay? So basically, we usually start with those habituated bears. We used to be asked to manage for a viewing opportunity. And what that means is a bear is behaving himself on a hillside, and we can manage the traffic jam. We will stop and let people view that bear. And what we're seeing is that is getting out of hand. And because what is happening to that bear in the presence of people? It is getting habituated, right? So now we've been asked to not manage viewing opportunities. Now we've been asked to haze those bears away or provide some kind of aversive conditioning. So in all of my trucks, I carry a little firecracker shooter, shoots firecrackers, makes a loud noise, and also paintball guns. We used to carry rubber buckshot, rubber slugs, and things like that in a 12-gauge shotgun. But what we realize is that you can be just as effective with a paintball gun as you can a 12-gauge rubber buckshot with slugs. Because all the bear feels, he just doesn't like the presence of being touched. He doesn't like to be touched. They like their space. So if you can reach out from a distance and shoot them with a paintball gun, that is very effective because they don't like that. They will run away. And so that's why I carry paintball guns. It's quiet, it's loud. Most people know what a paintball gun looks like when you pull it out. But I can promise you, everybody also knows what a 12-gauge shotgun looks like when you pull it out. So as you can imagine, I'm doing this in the eye of 14 million people. So we try to be as just as we can. So aversive conditioning, like I said, paintball guns, firecrackers, those are things that we use. Firecrackers work real well. Note of caution, if you use a firecracker, it's the middle of July, could start a fire. Just be cognizant of that, okay? The next thing, when we ratchet things up, when we have bears that are getting food conditioned or starting to get food conditioned, basically what happens is those bears come into our human developed areas in the park, and we only defend about 2% of the park. Picnic areas, campgrounds, trails, housing areas. Those are areas that are ours. We defend as human areas. 98% of the park is bear habitat. If those bears stay out there and do what they need to do, I have no interest in managing them. But those bears that come into our human developed areas, those are the ones that I'm going to try to capture. And when I capture them, it's pretty adverse, right? Just being a wild animal and put into a box. I mean, you guys are slightly wild animals. If I put you in a box for 24 hours, you're going to be like, man, this is terrible, right? But not just that. When I capture them, I have to tag them. I want to know what animal I'm handling with and dealing with so I can manage that behavior moving forward. Just like when you go to jail, you get a mug shot, right? It has a number on it. That's what you're known by for the rest of your life. When I handle bears, they end up getting little ear tags like that one right over there on my table. So they get an ear tag. They also get tattooed inside their mouth. They get a tooth pulled because when I pull that tooth, I can tell how old the bear is. So if I'm managing for a population, it's important to know how old your bears are. When we ratchet this up, when we release that bear, sometimes we will tase that bear. And that's 10,000 volts for 5 seconds, right? That sounds pretty adverse to me. If you've ever been tased, you probably know that's a terrible feeling. But all of this is meant to be negative to the bear, so it reinstills that fear of people back to the bear, right? So if capture on-site release, and what capture on-site release means, if I have a bear showing up on the edge of our picnic areas at dusk, right? People say, oh, there's a bear hanging around up here. It's not really doing anything, it's not really bothering anything, but it's just pacing back and forth right around the side of the picnic area in the campground. What do you think that bear's doing? He's waiting for you to leave, right? Because he has a fear of you, right? He's trying to keep you at distance, right? But as soon as the lights go out, the picnic area closes down at 8 o'clock, where do you think that bear is? Walking in amongst the picnic tables, licking the grills, picking up the half-eaten hot dog that my kid threw over there in the bushes, right? So what happens is we'll go set a trap, we'll catch that bear, that tagging process will happen. If you've ever seen the movie The Hangover, that's how I relate it to a lot of younger people. You know, the bear wakes up, he's been drugged, he's got a tattoo, he's missing a tooth, he's got a set of earrings, occasionally he might get a GPS collar, and most of the time, and we'll get to that here in a minute, but most of the time that's effective. We'll talk about those percentages. So if that isn't effective, if capture on-site release isn't effective, then we ratchet it up. And then we have an agreement, a working agreement with TWRA, which we work with on the daily, it seems like. If I capture a bear inside the park that is inside our human developed areas in daytime hours. So if I have a bear that strolls into the middle of the picnic area and jumps up on a picnic table and starts eating their food, I can't change that behavior, right? I could change that behavior. I relate it to people in discipline terms. If there is a juvenile at school in the 1st grade and he's stealing pencils, right? You send him to the principal's office, gets a stern talking to. They used to get paddled. They don't do that anymore. But you have a really good chance of changing that behavior. If you let that behavior escalate until that person is 25 years old and he's knocking off banks, right? If I slap him on the wrist and shoot him with a taser, do you think that's going to change his behavior? Absolutely not. These guys back here are like, he's speaking the truth, right? Because you can't change that behavior. That's what, we have prisons for. Within the bear world, I can't leave that bear on the landscape. I can't leave that bear because now he's going to come into that picnic area every day at lunch and do the exact same thing, right? And then people start putting their food in their car, and he starts ripping car doors off, and it just escalates, right? So a lot of times I will capture a bear before it gets to that point where that behavior is uncontrollable, and I will call TWRA and say, hey, I've got a bear I'd like to relocate out of the park. And first thing they're going to say is, what did it do? And if I say, oh, it tore a car door off, Dan's going to be looking at me and say, I'm not willing to accept that behavior, right? Because they have to manage the bears outside of the park, and they have to also manage that behavior. So I can't move criminal from my place to his place and that be acceptable, right? So if I capture that bear and he's over the line of what Dan is willing to accept or TWRA is willing to accept, then relocation is not an option, right? But for the most part, And to give you an idea, I handle about 50 to 70 bears a year in the park, and about 10 of those I relocate outside of the park, right? So we catch those bears. We're very proactive, not reactive. Because if you're reactive, usually that behavior is escalated to a point where you can't change it. So moving on, euthanasia. You know, that's the unfortunate part of my job. I didn't get in this job to kill bears. I didn't get in this job to kill anything. Am I a hunter? Yes. But hunting and euthanasia is two different things. So euthanasia, if I handle 70 bears a year, how many bears do you think I euthanize a year? For crossing the line in the sand. And what I mean by the line in the sand is touching a person, injuring a person, ripping a car door off, ripping into a tent. Those things that would be very threatening to you guys. Because I'm here to protect you guys, right? So, 5 bears?
5%.
5%? Up? More? 2. I euthanize on average 2 bears a year. Because I'm very proactive, right? If you're reactive, it would be more bears than that, right? The problem is that you can be reactive to a point. Proactive works much better. And proactive is being bear-proof dumpsters, doing everything you do to be bear-wise. That is being proactive. I'm not going to take questions right now. During this presentation and after this presentation, I'll be at my table and feel free to shoot me questions because I'm going to run over time anyway. Probably already am. All right, moving on. So capture on-site release. Basically, those bears that show up on the periphery, we catch them. This is the Timmy's picnic area. This bear has been tagged, got a tooth pulled, did the whole process. And this is, the bear was caught, Timmy's picnic area, went through that process, and I will drive that bear up there once he wakes up at noon. And everybody's like, why would you do it at noon? Because I want there to be the most number of people present as possible, right? When I release that bear, I want there to be a lot of people there. 1, for your enjoyment, and 2, for the bear's negative reinforcement, right? So I will drive a bear into the picnic area, and everybody's like, you got a bear in there? I'm like, yeah. What are you going to do with it? I'm going to turn it loose. What? Here? Right now? They're like, yeah, you guys want to come? And all of a sudden there's this wave of people that's following my truck. Right? And you can't see the picture of this. The people are right here. Right? And what I give this little small education program, and I say what I need you guys to do is clap and yell and scream and shoot video, of course, of what's happening. So what happens is this. Let's see if I can get this to play. Please work. Bear's facing the wrong way, it always happens. He's upset. He's been in jail for a night. So basically what I'm going to do here is when he comes out, I'm going to shoot him with a paintball gun, I'm going to shoot firecrackers at him, and he's going to run up the hill. See the paintballs hitting?
See you missing.
Hear the people yelling? Paintballs are cheap. All right, so that bear that was captured at Chimneys, he just got released. He had a terrible night in jail. If I catch those bears while they are nighttime active, right, not coming in there in the middle of the day, 61% of the time, I can change that behavior. I never have to deal with that bear again. To me, that's a really good percentage. So everybody's like 61. What happens to the other 49%, right? So those are bears that get, 39%. That's why I got Greg here to do my math. So that's why relocation, euthanasia, relocation inside the park is also an option. But 61% is as good as we've been able to get it. We hope to increase this number. Like instead of doing this process here, if that bear comes out and he gets 10,000 volts and a 5-second ride, if If we can jump that to 65%, any bit we can raise that, that's what we're shooting for, we're aiming for, is to increase the number of times that we have to, the least number of times we have to deal with a bear. All right, so moving on to research and our partners. We have a group called the Southern Appalachian Black Bear Study Group, which TWRA is part of. Also Kentucky Fish and Game, Virginia DNR, Georgia. All the wildlife bear biologists in the area get together and we share numbers and talk through things and try to make things better for us and the bears. And we track things through time. This is a graph that follows other mortality outside of harvest. So this would be roadkills and things like that. But your partners are really very impactful in what you do, because when I say we manage bears, I manage a very small subset of bears in the park. The bears that are in Tennessee today can be in Georgia and North Carolina and Virginia tomorrow. They can literally travel that fast, and we've shown that and documented that. So bears are a public trust. They are owned by you guys, and we are entrusted to manage them, right? And that's very important to remember. One of the things that come out of the Southern Appalachian Black Bear Study Group was a funded project through the University of Tennessee, where these little dots are actually hair snares, and basically it's barbed wire around trees and it grabs a bit of hair when the bear goes into it. And from that, those hair snares, they actually built this population estimate for these states, and this is what that population estimate was. So when people say, oh, well, how many bears do you have in Great Smoky Mountains National Park? This is where that number comes from, 1909. So when people ask, in 2019, I say we have 1,900 bears. Those are where those numbers come from. And for why people want to know how many bears we have, I have no idea, but it's very important to a lot of people. I know it's important to Dan at TWRA, because he's expected to be able to manage that population to where they're sustainable harvest through time. Right? So those bears can persist. One of the biggest components that we had that come out of this research and partnerships, the University of Tennessee and TWRA, was we, back in 2015 to 2017, I think was the time frame, I could be off a little bit, was this GPS collared bear study. And basically the question we wanted to answer was, everybody thinks these bears, they live inside the park, they stay in the park, they don't leave the park. That is totally not true, but we wanted to prove that. And since the technology was available, we put these GPS collars on these bears. And inside the park, it would take a coordinate every 2 hours. When they left the park, it would take a coordinate every 20 minutes. Right? So when a bear crossed the park boundary, his collar automatically started taking points. So I could see exactly what dumpster, what house, what motel, anything that bear was tracking through time and what that looked like on the landscape. And what we found out from this project was, guess what? The bears that live in the park are also the bears that leave the park and come into town and do things like that. I'm going to try something here. I'm going to go to this WBR did a news story on this some years ago, and I'm going to try to not tear this up. Bear with me. I know when that bear starts showing up around people, that bear's lifespan is greatly decreased.
The Great Smoky Mountains stands as a great sanctuary with 800 square miles to let wild bears act naturally. Biologist Ryan Williamson helps keep wildlife wild in a national park with more than 11 million visitors. Sometimes he has to separate them.
Bear will go in there, pulls the trigger, the door will trap, the bear will be there waiting for me the next day when we come in.
He relocates bears deeper in the park, farther away from people. But then what happens?
In the past, with the old technology, it'd be really easy to just lose track of those animals.
In 2015, several agencies teamed up to fund research by Tennessee grad student Jessica Braunstein. that set 27 problem bears free and tracked them for a year with GPS collars. And they did the same with a control group of what you consider good backcountry bears, not causing problems.
We thought there were two kinds of bears, front country bears and backcountry bears. And that 95% of the bears were thought to be backcountry bears, bears that were about their business, living in the woods, and had very little contact with humans.
Those front country bears are the ones that live close to countless cabins, dumpsters, and backyards where they can find an easy meal. That's why the city of Gatlinburg took a proactive step in 2000, created the only ordinance zone along the Smokies that requires bear-proof trash cans.
The thought process, if we had a boundary that was bear-proof, that maybe they wouldn't go beyond that if they didn't find food and garbage.
Now that the GPS study is done, these collars showed whether it's good bear, conflict bear, front country, back country, it doesn't matter. Almost every single bear leaves the park to find food.
Well, it was surprising how far out into the communities these bears are going.
It's not just males roaming in search of a mate. Even females with cubs will travel long distances.
We would never have seen this with old technology. Female bear we caught in Elkmont Campground. She took off looking for food, went all the way up here near Pigeon Forge. She looped over here, spent some time over at Walter Spade Community College, through downtown suburban, downtown. These bears are moving from one side to the other and in and out of the park, all the way across the park.
If he's not getting food in Gatlinburg, it doesn't mean he's not going to go to Cataloochee or go to Cosby or go to Townsend.
In Gatlinburg, biologists say that ordinance zone was a great start in 2000. Now it's not even a speed bump.
Things have changed a lot. We got a lot more people, we got a lot more bears, and we got a lot more visitors.
Scientists estimate there are 1,600 bears in the park, triple the amount in the 1990s. And the amount of people living in counties around the park has increased by 120,000.
One thing that GPS collar technology has showed us, there is no farther and deeper into the woods for the territory that these bears cover.
There are very few bears who are not impacted by what goes on outside the park. The park is huge, but it's not big enough to have self-contained bear population.
The study makes a myth of some long-time assumptions. Biologists say it requires people to change their mindset for bear-proofing their yards and government policy on trash.
It needs to be safe for both the visitors and for the animals.
Bears are expanding our bear proofing. We are behind the curve.
These maps and this study redefines who lives in bear country in East Tennessee.
And the black bear is one of those iconic things that we want to pass on to protect it for our future generations to enjoy.
In the Great Smoky Mountains, Jim Matheny.
Get back to where I was here. Yeah, WBR did a really good piece on that, and it kind of highlights a lot of the things that we just talked about.
It's like 5 years ago, right, Ryan? Probably 20.
Yeah, about 2019.
Wonder, is it still, is that piece still on their page? Can it be found online?
I think it can be. I have it embedded in this presentation. I couldn't get it to play in the presentation, so that's why I had to pull out and back to where I was here. All right, so this is kind of the highlight reel from that. It showed this map. Every one of these colors is a different bear. And basically what we learned is that 95% of the male bears leave the park and that 50% of our female bears leave the park. So majority of the bears in the park will leave the park at some point in time. And that is highly dependent on food sources. If we have a food failure, and what I mean by that is if we have a bad mast year, there's no berries, there's no acorns, then those bears will find food somewhere. And if that means to leave the area, they will do that. I had a female bear that left Grotto Falls, just above Gatlinburg. She went 36 miles one way with 2 cubs, all the way over to Foothills WMA, where she found food and lived all hunting season on the WMA. And then right before she came to den, she walked 36 miles back and denned right at Grotto Falls. So they have the ability to leave and come straight back. And that is what technology has taught us, because before we would have lost track of that bear and never knew what happened. But so we're all impacted, every bear in the park is impacted by what happens on our boundary. That's the reason I'm here, right? Because regardless of how good I manage my trash and manage my food and manage visitors in the park, we are 100% impacted by what happens on our boundary and our subdivisions and our neighborhood communities, and not just Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Sevierville, Cosby, Cherokee, Bryson City, all those places that impacts us. This is just a highlight of all these red dots are GPS locations for a bear, right? So every purple dot, this right here is one little bear location. That is the city of Gatlinburg, right? So what does that tell you? We have a lot of bears going in and through Gatlinburg, and this highlights that. I could show you each individual bear, but just the mass of that. And the cross is this is the old ordinance. I'm assuming we're set that ordinance zone has been expanded a little bit, and I haven't updated the map since then. Hopefully, at some point in time, all of Sugar County will be bear proof, right? That's our goal. I think every county that borders the park should be mandatory bear proof. That's my opinion. So moving on into what happens to those bears. So that was the GPS collar project that we had the question of, hey, what happens to bears inside the park? Did they leave the park? Did they come into the park? We answered that question. Well, 3 years ago, we had another question that we wanted answered. Those bears that we put GPS collars on, we take them outside of the park and we dump them off if Dan is willing to accept their behavior. What happens to those bears, right? So in 2016, we had a student come in and analyze some of our old data, and this data was analyzed based on ear tag returns. So if a bear got hit on the road, if it got harvested by a hunter, that's how we found out what happened to it, right? Which is a little ineffective. And this is what we came up with. Some of those bears were harvested, some of those bears came back and were recaptured, some of them were hit on the road, some of them had to be euthanized by us or the state agency or state agencies, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, Georgia. But we had this big giant hole, 74% unknown. Don't know what happens to them. Well, you know, being an optimist, you're like, wow, 74%, never got into problems, never heard from them again, right? All lived happily ever after. Question mark, right? What happened to those bears? Well, with this GPS collar technology, we were able to answer those questions. And currently, right now, this next slide, I was talking with a grad student last night. She is defending on the 26th. She has answered those questions, and she has some data for us that I have to try to translate right now, which is going to be difficult. So what happens to those bears? So the annual probability that a bear causes problems once it's relocated out of the park is 42%, right? So roughly half of those bears that I put out there on the landscape cause problems. And that's based simply on reports. And those are reports from landowners, reports from TWRA, reports from North Carolina Resource Commission. Those are reports that have came to us that said 42% cause problems. But if you look at the data, like I said, you can see in that map where those bears are going to, right? If you look at the data and look where those bears are, I might not have never gotten a report from it being on somebody's porch, but when I look at a visual representation of where they've been and I can see they're standing on somebody's porch, we call that a conflict, right? Regardless if the person knew that it was the bear or not, they probably did because they probably had to pick up the trash the next morning. Then 63% of those bears cause problems. Right? So, moving on, so 10 out of 50 bears, we had 50 bears relocated with collars. 10 of those returned home, right? So they came all the way back from where they were relocated from, and typically that is 40 to 60 air miles away, right? Because I can't take a bear 20 air miles because that percentage would be much higher because bears have an incredible homing instinct, right? So our data suggested back in the 80s, we did research on this and said we have to relocate bears at least 40 air miles for relocation to be effective at all. So 20% of those bears came back home after the 40 or 60 mile trip. So of that 20% that came back, so 40% of those bears, so 4 bears out of 10 that came back home, I had to deal with again. Either euthanized, relocated, recaptured, in some form or fashion, I had to deal with those bears again. But here's the kicker. Annual probability of survival of relocated bears was 19.4%. So when I put that bear on the landscape, there's a 20% chance that that bear survives. So is relocation a great option? Does relocation work? It is effective. It does work, but those bears pay the price for that, right? So what this told us is that relocation really isn't that great of an option for the bear. So what do we need to do? We need to do a better job of securing our food and garbage and making sure that those bears don't get food conditioned and or habituated to people, right? So that taught us what we needed to know, is that we can't take our problems elsewhere. There is no farther or deeper away. And if we take it away, it has a very small chance of survival. So the risk factors, when I put that bear on the landscape, what happened to it? How did it die? How did it get to be 80%, 80% mortality? Well, 48% of those bears were harvested, right? Which is not actually a bad thing. One of the first GPS collar bears that we relocated, a 14-year-old girl in North Carolina harvested as her first bear, right? It made the newspaper, it was a big hit. Would she have killed another bear if it wouldn't have been that bear? Probably. But 48% of those bears were harvested. 18.4% of those bears got killed by either a state agency, the Park Service, in some kind of conflict. Euthanasia via got into a house, broke into a car, caused conflict, killed somebody's livestock. All of those things happen. So 18% of that risk factors was euthanasia post-depredation. 15% of those bears were hit on the road. I-40 being a big one of those, because a lot of those bears went north across I-40, and when they try to come back, they were struck and killed on I-40. So relocation isn't a great option, right? And this study proved that. I think it's my last slide. 15 minutes over time. There's just a few facts or myths that I wanted to talk about when I have the stage. Like I said, there is no farther and deeper. Everybody says, "Oh, would you please come move this bear? It's such a giant problem." There's probably a really good chance there's something in your area that is the problem. It might be your neighbor. It might be you. You might have 15 bird feeders out and feed 10 cats outside, right? You might be the problem, right? If you get rid of the bird feeders, you get rid of the trash, you get rid of the cat food, the bear will leave, because the only thing the bear is interested in is food. If people would understand that would make my job a lot easier and make TWRA's job a lot easier. It is simple stuff. It is food. You remove the food, you remove the problem, right? There is no 3 strikes you're out policy. At least not in my part. I'm pretty sure there is no 3 strikes you're out policy in TWRA. And what that means is people will come to me and say, "Oh, that bear only has 1 ear tag. It's just got 1 strike. Better not catch it again." Well, if a bear has 1 ear tag, that means it lost 1, because I give every bear 2 ear tags, right? So if it has 2 ear tags, that doesn't mean it has 2 strikes. There is no 3 strikes you're out policy. Some bears in the park, I caught one the other day that I caught 8 times, right? Bears are managed based on their behavior, right? Sometimes it's a 1 strike you're out policy, right? If you come into my campground and you hurt someone, that is the end of the road. We don't tolerate bears that tear into cars. We don't tolerate bears that hurt people, right? We as humans are not going to tolerate that, right? So that's why there is no 3 strikes you're out policy. Some bears just need to be reminded occasionally that people are bad for them, right? I had a female bear with 3 cubs in the picnic area the other day. It was her 8th capture, right? She has been relocated. She made it back home. She's still a conflict, but I try to manage that with, white gloves and move her out of the area, and hopefully she finds food and she doesn't remain a problem. We're rebranding bears. They're no longer nuisance bears. We're trying to get away from the term nuisance bears, because it gives the bears a negative connotation, right? The bear is not the nuisance. the bear is just being a bear, right? And the bear is just hungry. He's trying to find something to eat. If you were starving, you would probably do the same, right? So we're rebranding nuisance bears to human conflict bears, right? So that way the bear isn't at fault for anything. The bear is just being a bear, right? So you'll hear a lot of us in this room say conflict bear. We're trying to get away from nuisance bear. We do not like killing bears. I'll say this every presentation. I didn't get in this job to kill bears. I don't like to kill bears, but it's part of the job. Part of my job as a public servant is to protect you guys. So when I have to euthanize a bear that came in and got in a tent, got on a picnic table, hurt someone, that means I failed at my job at some point and somewhere. That means I wasn't reactive enough to catch that bear or proactive enough to deal with the situation or the behavior. As humans, we can do better, right? The bears are just going to be bears, and they're going to seek food and find food. We just have to be more responsible with managing our food sources, right? Our bird feeders, our grills, our trash cans, all of those things, we can do a better job of dealing with that, right? I will be at this table over here. If you have any questions, please come by, see me. I'll be here. I guess I'll be doing this presentation again at 1 o'clock. I'm sure I probably won't see any of you here at 1 o'clock, but hopefully there'll be a bunch of new faces. And there's my phone number is right there. My email address, feel free to reach out. I'll answer any questions and help you if I can. And if not, I'll make sure I pass your number on to Janelle Musser, who will help you with that as well.